안녕하세요. 어린이 목장 11월달 교재를 소개해드리겠습니다. Hey kids, the theme for November is Exodus. Exodus is one of the famous stories in the Bible. God chose Moses, who grew up as a prince of Egypt, to lead the Israelites out of Egypt from slavery. Moses listens and obeys the God's order. Let's study the lessons and see how the story unfolds.
November 4th, 2011, our lesson for today is God called Moses. The Bible passage is Exodus 3. Memory verse is, whatever you do, do it enthusiastically. Colossians 3:23. The descendants of Jacob, the Israelites, multiplied greatly in Egypt. After Joseph and Pharaoh died, the Israelites soon became slaves to the Egyptians. The life in Egypt became unbearable. The Israelites began to cry out to God for help. God knew it all and wanted to end the hardship in Egypt. Moses escaped from Egypt. He lived in a town near Mount Horeb, also called Mount Sinai. He worked by taking care of his father-in-law's sheep. One day, he was watching the sheep nearby the mountain. He saw a bush burning with fire, but it was very strange. The bush was on fire, but it was not burning up. Moses went closer to the burning bush, and that was when he heard God's voice. Moses, Moses, go back to Egypt. God said to Moses to go back to Egypt and lead all Israelites out of Egypt. The Israelites were suffering in Egypt, working as slaves. Moses said to God, why me? Why shall I say? What shall I say? What if the people don't believe me? Please send someone else. Moses was afraid, but God had chosen Moses to do the job. God said to Moses, listen to me. I will be with you all the time. Your brother Aaron may go with you and speak for you, and I will help you both. Moses listened and obeyed God. Moses knew that God had gifted and made him so that he could rely on God to carry out his purpose. God gives talent and trains those he calls. We should all use our talents in ways that please and honor God. Second topic is on the Israelites left Egypt for November 11th, 2011. Bible passage, Exodus 5 through 12. Memory verse, I am with you and I will watch over you wherever you go. Genesis 28:15. With God's help, Moses and Aaron came to Pharaoh. They spoke to the king about how God wanted his people out of Egypt and out of slavery. Pharaoh refused to listen to Moses and Aaron. He became so angry that he ordered to increase the workload on the Israelites. He would not let the Israelites go. He needed them to work for him. The Israelites cried out even more. They had to work more hours and harder than ever before. In the end, they complained and blamed Moses and Aaron for everything. Moses complained to God that Israelites were being punished instead of being set free. God listened to Moses and assured him that his people would soon be free. God showed his power through Moses. He sent plagues to Egypt. Pharaoh's heart hardened after each plague. Each time, the Egyptians suffered. Pharaoh became angrier, but still refused to let the people go. It was the time for the 10th and final plague. God gave a detailed instruction to Moses for the Israelites to follow in order to survive. That night, the death angel struck all the firstborn males in Egypt. Pharaoh woke up in the night and discovered that death had come to his house and killed his son. However, no harm came to the Israelites. Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron that very night and commanded, all of you leave now. Take everything and leave now. Finally, God's people were free from slavery at last. God hears and answers the prayers of His children and cares for them. Sharing would be, have you ever faced a work that seemed impossible to handle? Do you pray to God for help when that happens? November 18th, 2011. The Israelites crossed the Red Sea. Bible passage, Exodus 13:17 through 15:21. Memory verse, for you are great and perform wonders. You alone are God. Psalm 86:10. Pharaoh's heart hardened after each plague. The last plague was the death of Pharaoh's firstborn son. The king realized that he could not go against the God of Israelites. The king let the Israelites go out of Egypt, but he changed his mind and wanted the Israelites back to be his slaves. Pharaoh had his best army men to go after the Israelites. Meanwhile, the Israelites and Moses were on their way out of Egypt, as happy as they can be, free at last. But unfortunately, the Israelites saw the Egyptian army racing toward them, and they were frightened. They cried out to Moses, "Why did you bring us to die in the wilderness? We could have stayed and served the Egyptians." Moses said, "Don't be afraid. The Lord will take care of you. He will fight for you." Then Moses stretched out his hand over the waters of Red Sea. God used his power and divided the water, and the dry land appeared. The Israelites walked on the dry land between the two walls of water. Everyone crossed the Red Sea safely. This was the greatest wonder of God that people ever saw and experienced. The Egyptian soldiers kept on following the Israelites, and they too were crossing the Red Sea. But God had the water close on them, and every soldier drowned. Not one of them survived. Moses listened and obeyed God. God is great. God had taken care of them as he promised. The promised land was closer than ever. Sharing. I can trust God to take care of me. Have you ever experienced the wonders of God? November 25th, 2011. God gave the 10 Commandments. Bible passage, Exodus 20, Deuteronomy 5, 1 through 21. Memory verse, we will do and obey everything that the Lord has commanded. Exodus 24:7. Under the leadership of Moses, the Israelites traveled through the land, through the Red Sea, and finally arrived at the base of Mount Sinai. Moses had returned to the mountain where God had spoken to Moses through a burning bush. The Israelites camped out in the desert in front of Mount Sinai. The number of population was 600,000 men, not counting women and children. Moses prayed to God to help him to better serve the people. God spoke to Moses to remind the Israelites that if they fully obeyed him, they would be elevated above the other nations of the world and would be his special people. The people promised to do everything God had said. With God's promise, God gave Moses the 10 Commandments for his people. The first 4 commandments deal with a person's relationship to God, and the last 6 commandments deal with a person's relationship with other people. God emphasizes the importance of relationship with God and with others. For 40 years in the desert, their living conditions were rough and their lives were not easy, but the Israelites flourished, free from Egypt and free from the slavery. The Israelites worshipped and obeyed God. Sharing. I can obey God's rules. Why are rules so important? Have you ever broken any rules from school, home, or church? What were the Crafts material for November 4th, 2011. God called Moses. For materials you will be needing crayons, scissors, stapler, brass paper fastener, paper hole punch. Direction. Cut out each story page and the wheel piece. Cut out the flame shapes where indicated on the bush. Illustrate each page of the story. Color the wheel mixed red, orange, yellow crayons. Punch hole with brass paper fastener or hole punch and attach the wheel to the back of the bush. Put together the story pages in order and staple them all together. So, crafts for week 2, November 11th, 2011. The Israelites left Egypt. God showed his people power through Moses. He sent plagues to Egypt. Materials needed: crayons, scissors, glue. Direction. Color and cut out the pieces. You can make one long straight snake or a wiggly snake, whichever you prefer. Week 3, November 18th, 2011, the Israelites left Egypt. They cried out to Moses when Israelites saw the Egyptian army racing toward them. Moses said, "Don't be afraid, the Lord will take care of you." Then Moses stretched out his hand over the waters of the Red Sea. Materials needed: crayons, scissors, glue stick. Direction. Color the pictures and the people. Fold along the dotted lines so the water is lifted up. Cut along the line next to the water. Cut out the people and slide the characters into the slit. Week 4, November 25th, 2011. God gave the 10 Commandments. God gives Moses the 10 Commandments for his people. Materials needed: crayons, markers, scissors. Direction. Follow along the demonstration on video clip. Cut and color.